Let's be brutally honest right now. That's a big question.
I'm looking for someone who doesn't want to go to base camp, but they want to go to the very top.
Whether it's here, India, New York.
Civilization was born at happy hour.
That's what wins. That's what stands out. That's what people are interested in. That's what I want to know. The Hospopreneurs podcast with James Henderson.
Hello and welcome to episode 121 of the Hospopreneurs podcast. Katy Barfield, the founder of Yume, returns to the program for this Hospopreneurs Plus episode. Today we have a much broader conversation than back at episode 88, and this time keep it a little more free form for you to enjoy. Katy shares the fantastic passion that she's known for to add value to the world by minimizing food waste, and there are some news stories today that you won't see coming. Hello and welcome back to the show, Katy. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show again in this brave new world that we're living in.
Thanks for having me back. It's great to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you on. I'm very excited to hear about what's been going on. It's taken us a little while to get to this Hospopreneurs Plus episode, this recording. You were unwell, and we were talking just before recording that you were actually in quite a complicated scenario there. Actually, I'd love for you to elaborate, please, for listeners.
Yes, it was just unfortunate timing, I think, really, James. I was doing a presentation for Yume over in New Zealand. This is a very tail end of February before all of the madness struck. And I flew back. So I'd been on an international flight, tick. And then I arrived back, and after about 2 weeks, I developed some pretty significant symptoms. And this is when people were just starting to wake up to the whole coronavirus thing. And they were exactly tick, dry cough, tick, sniffy nose, tick, all of these things I had. And so I went off for a virus test and it came back negative. And they were like, okay, so you're negative, all good, see you later. But of course I deteriorated quite badly. But because I hadn't had COVID, it was, okay, job done, you're good, next. I had to go back to the doctors. And it turned out I had atypical pneumonia, which is actually very contagious. And I've been spreading that love around and can be quite nasty. So after a couple of courses of very strong antibiotics and a bit of rest, I came good. But yes, I'm sorry that this has been a bit delayed, but that's the reason. And I think it's one of those unintended kind of consequences of coronavirus. You don't have coronavirus, and we're all very focused on that, understandably, but you don't have that, so off you pop. But there's probably a lot of illnesses and viruses and various other things that are, circulating around the community and maybe making people quite unwell that are not being diagnosed or being missed because people are too concerned to go out to the doctor or too concerned to raise the alarm or whatever it might be, or they get a negative test and they're like, well, it's not that, so I guess I'll be okay. But actually, it's a very big reminder to people to make sure that you look after your health on every level, because COVID is not the only thing out there that can do some damage.
Yes, we've finally managed to line up a time to have this chat, and I'm so glad that you're well now. I hadn't considered, I mentioned there before we recorded having that chat, that I also hadn't considered that there may be some other complications that are like this circulating, because we are very focused on COVID. There are other things that are going unmanaged there, because you would think that by distancing, then the virality of these viruses, right, they can't spread as well. So you would think that it's going to be good overall to help drive them out of circulation, but obviously not. Thank you for sharing that story. I hope that doesn't concern too many listeners, but obviously that's something that is happening. It happened to you, so I'm sorry to hear that happened, but glad to hear that you're well.
Thank you very much.
I mentioned when we were having that conversation, I mentioned that I'm actually up in Brisbane now. I'm not in Melbourne. And today we're recording so shortly after the announcement of an extension of the restrictions in Melbourne and in Victoria there. That is obviously troubling for a lot of people down there, such as yourself in the space. I've tried to avoid talking about the coronavirus too much on the show, but given that it is quite recent news, I thought we would just touch on that at the beginning here. Now, I haven't actually shared with listeners what I did, which was essentially I lost a lot of work in Melbourne, and then I actually went to a whiskey dinner with Dave Broom. And he was announcing a new documentary that he put together. It was excellent. It was a really good time. And I went with a friend of mine. I won't announce who it was on the show. He's just a good mate of mine. He came back from a trip to Trinidad and Tobago for a rum event. And anyway, he came back and we were at this event together, and he was just like, oh, I'm pretty jet lagged. Like, I'm just feeling a bit run down. I'm fine. I'll come to this whiskey dinner. It'll be totally fine. And in hindsight, now you can see where this is going. But back then, nothing was really going on. Like, we heard about this coronavirus thing in China. There was an outbreak and people were a bit worried about it. This is in early March, right? So there was a little bit going on. Anyway, he went to the event and I actually took a date to that event. And long story short, we had a great time. And a couple of days later, my friend texted me, I've got to call you. So he called me and he said, I've got something to tell you, James. And I was like, oh. And he said, I've got coronavirus. And I was like, oh, no. So I was very worried at that point. I thought I was going to die. I was so scared. I said, what should I do? He said, you should probably quarantine immediately. So I went home and then the Australian Department of Health called me within seconds of walking in the door. So I have the direct line to the Australian Department of Health.
That's good response time. Pretty impressive.
It is. Oh, it was so good. I don't know what it's like now, but like, so my friend was the 6th case in Australia, right?
Wow.
6th case.
Trailblazer, but not in the right way.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you don't want to be pioneering that sort of history. But yeah, look, he got it. He gave it to his family. They all recovered. Everyone's healthy. They're all good. But I went home. I quarantined for 2 weeks. In those 2 weeks, the Department of Health said you have to quarantine for 2 weeks now. You're in your room? Excellent. You can't leave that now. So I was like, great.
So where were you, James? Were you in Brisbane at this point or you were in Melbourne?
I was in Melbourne still. So I was in a cafe in Melbourne, sitting in a cafe, bustling, excellent venue in St Kilda. I was just having a great time. I was like, yeah, getting my work done, like sitting on my laptop in the window. I'm like, yeah, it's like everyone, it's rushing around to this busy cafe. And then I just went, oh, I got this call from him and he's like, yeah, you should go home right now. So I went home and quarantined for 2 weeks. In those 2 weeks, everything really fell apart. Everything started crashing over the entire world. And I was just reading everything on social media and the news, and then everything starts getting announced. It becomes a pandemic. And then, so I started losing a lot of my work. Anything in hospitality was just falling apart. From there, I took the 2 weeks and I got tested as well. I was a bit worried and I was stuck in my room. So I didn't even have a window in my room at that point. I had hardly any sunlight and it was pretty rough. It's pretty rough being quarantined for 2 weeks. I'm sure a lot of people, maybe even listeners, have done it now. It's hard. Have you done it yourself, Katie?
No, I haven't had to. I've had a test and had to wait the 2 or 3 days before I get the results, but I haven't had to quarantine. No, I haven't. Thank goodness.
Yeah, keep your fingers crossed because it's pretty rough having to do that. So I did those 2 weeks. In those 2 weeks, everything crumbled. I got tested at the Royal Melbourne. There was no real process in place there at the time. There was some A4 pieces of paper out the front of this one door and they're like, yeah, this is where the COVID tests are for a couple of people who were really worried about it or might have coronavirus. It was because it was so early in those days. And then I went in, had a test. We were all shuffled into this one hallway. Yeah, the chairs were spaced out, but they were too close together. Like it was a bit too close for me. And there were people coughing and I was like, oh no, maybe actually I'll get something in this room. So anyway, I got tested at about 1 a.m, eventually waiting there for a while, got home, waited a few days. I think it was about 3 or 4 days later. I got the result back and it was negative. So I was very happy, but still had to quarantine for 2 weeks. The long story short is that over those 2 weeks, things got worse. I lost a lot of my work and then went, okay, what am I going to do? The border was going to close in Queensland and I'm from Brisbane. So I decided to hire a rental car and drive up just before the border closed. And so I made that decision. It was within hours that I needed to make it for the border. So I hired a rental car, packed up everything in my room and drove up from Melbourne to Brisbane. I slept in the car for 2 hours that night before I got into Sydney. In a petrol station car park.
Glamorous, real glamorous.
It was, this little petrol station in Goulburn on the way to Sydney. And I went inland, not the scenic ocean route. I would never do that again. I was hopped up on shots of honey and multivitamin tablets with guarana. And that got me from Melbourne to Brisbane in one piece with no accidents. So,
oh my goodness, I've got a question for you though. So you did mention that you were at this party, which is where you had this close contact with your friend who had coronavirus, and you were there with a date. I'm desperate to know what happened with the date. A, did the date get coronavirus? And B, did she just run for the hills when she thought you might have it? And C, are you still seeing said date? Come on, give us spill the beans.
I appreciate you flipping the tables on me, Katie, with some questions here.
I'm genuinely interested. I'm like, you just threw that in, but then I need my ending. I need to conclude that story.
I like to tell a bit of that story, but I forgot that I didn't actually finish that part of the story. So thank you for bringing that back into the limelight. So essentially, I met that girl the weekend before. I was doing it at work, just helping out on the door at a venue just for 2 or 3 hours on a Friday. And I just stand there on the door, welcome people in. People are like, I recognize that guy. Some of them will walk past. I'm like, eh. Anyway, so I would just invite people into this venue. And I met this one girl and then invited her out. We went on this date on the Thursday to this event. And we had a great time. It was an excellent date. I had a great time. I won't go into the specifics. Had a lovely time, introduced you to a lot of people. And then a couple of days later, she went to a music festival. And I was like, oh no. As soon as I heard that my friend had coronavirus, I went, okay, tried to contact her at the music festival, and she was having the music festival experience, is the way that I will put it on the program, okay?
Having a lovely time, lots of coffee and cookies.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, great.
That's exactly right. So I tried to contact her on Facebook because that's the only contact I had with her. We just met each other. I was like, oh, what's your Facebook? And then we had a chat on Facebook. So we were on Messenger, and I was trying to get in contact with her because I heard my friends got coronavirus. She wasn't answering, and I was like, oh no, well, I don't want to badger her. We've got a good date coming up next week, and now I've got a quarantine, so I can't see her on this date. So I'm trying to contact her to tell her I can't go on this date, and by the way, you might have coronavirus. So I tried to contact her, couldn't get through. Eventually, I contacted her on this, I think it was the Sunday or the Monday. I think it was a long weekend, and she was coming back. So eventually got through to her in the car. She didn't want to call on the phone. She's like, I'm in the car with these guys. Anyway, texted her, and then she just blocked and deleted me and never wanted to talk to me again. And I've never heard from her ever again.
What? Over coronavirus?
Over coronavirus, that's right. It's a sad ending to my story.
Oh, it is. Bit of an anticlimax there, James. I thought that was going somewhere.
Maybe it was going to be a beautiful, at least friendship where we could quarantine together, but it didn't work out like that, no.
Clearly empathy wasn't her strong point though, so maybe it wasn't ever going to be a kind of story that was going to end well in the whole looking after each other type of thing. She's like, oh, coronavirus, bye-bye, delete.
Yeah, oh well, I'm not too hurt by that. It was sudden and it was disappointing because we had a good time, we had a good connection, but it wasn't meant to be. And now I've spent 10 minutes telling you that story, so thank you, Katy, for...
No, it's all right. I'm channeling I used to do some co-hosting with John Fane on ABC. And so I'm channeling a bit of my co-hosting skills there, but I was genuinely intrigued by your story. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Katy. We can co-host a show together. Who would you like to interview on our co-hosted show?
Oh, that's a bloody good question. Who would I like to interview? Dan Andrews. Let's get Dan Andrews on.
Goodness.
Actually, Brett Sutton. I think he's a bit sexy. So maybe we'll get Brett Sutton on. It's actually quite funny. So the health officer, who now apparently has a whole range of different artifacts that people can buy that have his face on them, everything from a cushion to a mug. So quite interesting turn of events there that we've got this politician that's become quite a poster boy pin-up for all of the sort of middle-aged housewives, which I love.
That's fantastic. Obviously for his brand, he's out there in the public eye. Actually, it got me thinking. You got me thinking about something else because someone has contacted me about a very popular reality TV show, whether I wanted to be on that show.
There's quite a few of those now, James, because that's apparently all we want to watch these days is people singing under masks or cooking something up or jumping out of planes or being in a jungle or all sorts of things. But yes, continue. I'm intrigued again.
So someone asked me about this show and I was deciding whether to be on it or not be on it. I'm just going to discuss that with you live on this program because Hospopreneurs Plus, we can do that. I'm very happy to do that. So I'm not going to divulge exactly what the show was, but I keep thinking that there are costs and benefits of doing that and building a brand in that way. And ultimately, I think that I am going to say no. I haven't heard back yet about the final verdict on it.
Okay, why? Let's just unpack that. Why are you saying no? Unless it is, of course, jumping out of planes and you've got a terrible fear of heights and you think you might just actually embarrass yourself on national TV. I need to understand why you would say no.
Look, without going into the specifics of the show, I feel like this particular program won't brand me in the way that I really want if I was to build a public image. It's not really my jam. And I think that's tough to weigh up because this is a very popular show. I just don't think I can do it because then forever, a subset of the population is going to go, oh, I recognize you from that show.
But do you want to hear my Big Brother show story? Because I've got a Big Brother show story from London. This is the first time it ever came out, which is now really showing my age, so we won't discuss the year. But anyway, so it was the very first time that Big Brother was going to be done anywhere. And I was doing some acting at the time. So my master's is actually in acting, which is something not many people know about me. I did train as an actress and I was doing Moliere and Shakespeare and a really traditional type of training. And I loved it. And I did it because I absolutely loved books and I loved English and English literature. And I was obsessed with all of those kind of stories and that escapism, I think, really is what I was drawn to. I've always been a bit like that. So anyway, I was in that world and I was doing some work. And after I came out of drama school, I was on the road with a playwright, very famous playwright called Alan Ayckbourn, who is the second most performed playwright after Shakespeare in England. And I was in the West End and it was a fabulous experience. Anyway, that meant that I was privy to things like this that were going on. And someone put me up for this show that no one really knew anything about. And I went in and they auditioned you and they check to make sure you're quirky enough so you make good TV, and you'll probably make a bit of a twit of yourself so that they can, make you look like an absolute numpty and get the sort of the sensational value out of it. But anyway, I got accepted. But one of the conditions was you couldn't tell anyone about said show. And of course, I didn't take it that seriously. And I told a friend, and then they rang the friend, because you had to give all of these references to make sure that you're not a psychotic nut job that's going to maybe take everybody out of the Big Brother house. And my friend said, oh, yeah, she told me about this. So they struck me off. And that was the first ever series of Big Brother that was pioneered. So I would have been on the first one ever. So there you go. There's my reality TV story. But if you asked me to do it now, I would run for the hills screaming with my hands in the air. Not that they're really into sort of mothers of two in their 40s. That's not their jam. You never know. Maybe they could do.
That could be controversial. You might make some very controversial decisions on that show.
I'll tell you what, I bloody speak my mind, that's for sure. Put any of that nonsense. Yeah, but then now if we were talking about something like The Block, I'd be right into that, because I love a bit of reno. I do fancy myself as a bit of a designer, James. I sit there and pull holes in it, but I don't know if I could do the sleeping in a hut kind of thing that they have to, but make good TV, because I'd probably lose the plot many times if I hadn't had enough sleep. But there you go. So there you go. That's my reality TV show story. So if it was Big Brother, I would suggest you run for the hills, my friend, because yes, I don't think that's necessarily a good brand builder, but there are some others that I think would be very good. So we can discuss that offline.
Yes, thank you. No, you can channel it in some ways. And this is talking about PR stuff, and neither of us are PR people, but someone might be listening out there with a lot of experience in PR being like, yeah, you could totally use that.
Yeah, probably.
And the PR mates that I've spoken with about it have gone, yeah, this is actually a good opportunity. You should use that. And then I'll have to hire those people to help my brand. That's the thing. So
yeah, I like it. So it's a bit of BD for them, a bit of business development.
Right.
They're like, no, you really should do this, James. And then let us help manage your brand. I tell you one I would jump at, and that would be Survivor. I would jump at Survivor. I love that show, I have to say. I'm a bit of a junkie.
I don't actually watch any reality TV. So it's going to be a show that I would never, ever watch. Like, anyway, I'm going to move away from the reality TV question to another thing in the limelight to kind of come back to a bit more about you, Katy, as well. So something else that is in the limelight, this is my segue. Sustainability at the moment is really something that is continuing to explode. It's something that's becoming more and more important with ESG reporting and all sorts of business processes and practices. And people are getting caught out for not having sustainability programs as well. How are you seeing the future of sustainability in food with regards to business practices?
Look, I'd love to tell you that it's been a rapid and swift shift to sustainability, but that's not the case. It's been a slow grind. I've been working in this space and trying to draw attention to the problem of food waste for well over a decade now. And when I first sort of started to talk about it, people thought that I was absolute lunatic. And why would you want to rescue tomatoes? Tomatoes don't need rescuing. And now, of course, food rescue is something that's just part of the vernacular. It's just a word that everybody understands what it means. But certainly when I first started using that about 12 years ago, people just didn't even understand what I was talking about. It has been a slow grind. I think now we're getting to a point where questions are asked if companies aren't doing something in that sustainability space. But then the question that we need to be asking is, what are they actually doing? Because there is quite a lot of greenwashing that goes on out there. So companies that make big claims or say they don't do something, so we don't send any food to landfill. That could be true, but they could still be depackaging it and injecting it under the soil or doing something with it over here or something over there that is also not environmentally sound choice. So I think there are, again, back to our PR comment, people can spin these things any which way they want. And one of the hardest things that I've found is really getting people to open the kimono and just let you in and just go, right, okay, let's just show you what we got. Let's show you all of this waste. And let's work together to try and find solutions further up the food waste hierarchy for it. So the food waste hierarchy is basically this map that we use of where you can extract the most value out of food. And landfill, of course, would be at the very bottom. And at the top would be avoid it in the first place. Yeah, and then you've got reuse it, and that would be donation or selling it, and then there would be animal feed and so on and so forth. So for me, there's a lot of opportunity there, and there really is. And I think that what you're about to see in the next month or so is a re-release of the federal government's food waste statistics that are going to shock everybody. They put in that 4.1 million tonnes of food goes to waste in the commercial and industrial food space. 7.3 million tonnes going to waste every year across all different categories. So that's your home and your hospitality and everything else as well. You're about to see a significant jump that was way underestimated. So we're actually doing a lot worse than we thought in Australia. So there is a long way to go, James.
What about things like packages that delivery companies are using? Are they sustainable? Is that something that you've dealt with, that you understand a little bit more about as well?
No, only on a personal level. That's not my area of expertise. Obviously, my area of expertise is food waste and how to stop food waste in the system and what points in the supply chain the leaky bucket is and how we can come up with innovative solutions to stop that leaky bucket. But when it comes to packaging, my own personal opinion is it's just shocking. I'm shocked as somebody who is very aware in the sort of sustainability space of how much crap gets delivered to my house, because at the moment I've got 2 children and I do need to buy some stuff, and all the charity shops, because I'm normally somebody who is trying to not purchase new wherever I can. I'll use Marketplace or the local Inner West Buy Swap and Sell group that we've got. There's a lot of trading and bartering that goes on, and you can get some really beautiful pieces and you can offload some really great pieces as well to people, and that's a really sustainable way to furnish your house and refresh, etc. But all of that's closed, and it's been closed since March. My children have grown. I've got kids that are growing and I can't get clothes, so I'm having to order stuff from shops, trying to be as sustainable as I can for my growing 11-year-old and 9-year-old boys. The 9-year-old's right because he just gets all the hand-me-downs, but the 11-year-old has just suddenly grown huge. He's in size 14. And I'm having to buy stuff, and I'm horrified. Absolutely horrified by how unsustainable the packaging is that arrives on my doorstep. I don't know why everything needs to be packaged 8 times in plastic with little pockets of plastic air in there. I don't understand. I don't get it.
Katy, when we finished recording your episode together last year, we had an excellent long conversation afterwards about all these other things that I hadn't really introduced a lot onto the program much yet. And a lot of this comes out post-episode or pre-episode even. Sometimes with certain guests, I'll have these conversations and I don't get to share a lot of this on the show. So it's good to have this with you on a Hospopreneurs Plus episode. What I try to get out through the show is sharing what really sits behind the minds of a lot of people who do anything in business, people who have this really strong why behind what it is that they do. And that's not a revolutionary concept or topic. And it's certainly more common discourse these days, talking about why you do what you do instead of just what you do. For me, that was reading Simon Sinek's TED Talk years ago now, and he's obviously been very successful since. That's really why I love to ask that question. I want to try to push a little deeper into why it is that you do what you do.
Look, it's a great question. And I think I was aware from as far back as I can remember, I was aware of how small we were. I never had, that I can remember, this kind of artificial idea that we're somehow this sort of supreme species that was put here to dominate everything else. I've just never understood that or even given that any airtime. And I remember as a child, I grew up in Hertfordshire, which is this sort of countryside England, in this, what was a 16th century house. It was built in the early 1500s. And I'd lie in the garden and look up at the stars 4 hours. I'm sure people thought odd child, but for me it was as natural and as normal as you can get to just sit there and think about what was outside of the planet, what was outside of that, what all of those stars were suns and they all have planets around them. And I was just obsessed with astronomy and obsessed with how small we were. So I kind of right-sized the human race from the get-go. And the fact that we are part of a ecosystem, we are not the most important part of that ecosystem. We are part of an ecosystem on this small planet, which is beautiful, full of natural beauty, and can provide us with absolutely everything we need. Every single thing we need is on this planet if we treat it accordingly. But we got greedy and we wanted more of what was already there. So we kept overspending, if you like, on overshoot. Call it Overshoot Day now, which is getting earlier every year. That's when we've eaten into the Earth's resources for that year. And that date keeps coming forward and forward and forward. It's really concerning. And I've always wanted to preserve life as well. So even when we had a cat in Hertfordshire and it would get a bird and I would prise its mouth open and I would nurse these birds back to life. My dad still talks about it. It was just this thing that I did and no one taught me to do it. And my mum and dad are not like that at all, I might say. So it's something that's just come from within me and a great appreciation and respect for nature. And I'm horrified and have to stop and prevent myself from getting quite depressed about the way that we do treat the planet, try to stay optimistic and find solutions of how we can preserve the gift that we've been given, because we're not doing a very good job of it, to be honest. And there is no planet B, which is obviously a program at the moment, but there is no planet B. This is it. And I'm not really up for going to Mars. I know some people have signed up for that job, but no, thank you, sorry. I don't want to go and live in a place with no oxygen and no life. This is what we've got. We bloody well need to have a bit more respect and stop thinking about our own lives, our own wealth, our own, how big's our house, how have we decorated it, what's the car like in the driveway. All of these things are completely off the mark, and we wonder why. If that was the answer, then no one would have depression. There would be no issues of mental health. Yet we're seeing all that skyrocket. So the reality is, the more we have, it's not the happier we get because we've got more things. We actually become less fulfilled, more unhappy, more disconnected from nature. And actually it's nature that nurtures us, and it's that can make us more fulfilled, more connected, and just happier in general. But we've lost touch with that. We look for happiness in all the wrong places.
Thank you for sharing that, Katy. There was a community that I used to foster a few years back, now disbanded. I haven't run anything since, but I called it the Knowledge Exchange, and it was just a group of people that would hang out on Thursday nights. We would just catch up and talk about these sorts of things, about philosophy, about business, about essentially it was anything that people were interested in. So I just really loved having those conversations with people about what they were passionate about, what they were really inspired by, and what was driving them. And that was ultimately, after 2 years of doing that, it settled on this sort of small group of maybe about 11, 12, maybe even 14 people max coming in on a Thursday. And it fluctuated week to week, ebbed and flowed in the number of people who attended. But that was ultimately what founded the City Bushdorf, which was the event that I hosted in 2017. It was a Facebook event that went viral and then turned into this small music festival. So I don't know if we've actually talked about that off the show, Katy, but that was the event that really did some interesting things for me, taught me about how to run my own PR. And it was a really interesting experience, taught me a bit about the music industry, not an incredible amount, but I was learning on the fly. But it started from this incredible community of people who just like to ask questions. And ultimately, it settled on a few different sort of tenets that I have now. And I look for people just in the world. I'm interested to flesh this out a little bit with you in terms of your own sort of things that you might have that you look for in other people. The first was the ambition to acquire knowledge. So this is this thirst for the acquisition of knowledge, for growing and expanding, exploring their own ideas internally. That often flowed into externally as well, into building things, creating, achieving all sorts of great things in the world. And the second, which is equally as important, is the humility to continue to question our own ideas. And so that one is in balance with that ambition. So the ambition to acquire knowledge and the humility to continue to question our own ideas. So that really is this ability to remove ego associated with our own beliefs and our own systems, our own concepts and questions, and to look beyond them, to wear other people's ideas as a sort of a shirt or a hat or however you visualize it, to try on other people's ideas to see how it feels. How would you see the world if it was like that? That's how I like to break that down. Are there some things that you look for in other people in the world? Have you thought about those sorts of things before?
No, I haven't thought about it as structured in such a structured way as that. What are the qualities I look for in people? I rely very heavily on my instinct, my sort of gut instinct. And I know that scares a lot of people because they're like, well, you can't always be right. And I'm not. When I don't listen to it, it's never ended well. So I think for me, it's about authenticity. I like to surround myself with people who are authentic, good and bad. Just be yourself. Don't paper over the cracks and present me with a version of yourself. I'm exactly the same person talking to you now as I am in my office with my team, as I am when I walk down the shops, as I am when I chat to Michael, who busks outside of my local greengrocers. Yeah, I'm exactly the same person. For me, I reckon it would be a really long, exhausting life to try and be or project something else or some image or version of yourself to the world. I think that's just so sad and such a shame. And the world's then missing out on a whole load of people, because I think that I look at Instagram, which I try not to look at too much, to be quite honest, just these images that are projected. Like, it's just really sad, to be honest, because There's so much more to people than the image that they portray. So I think for me, the key thing would be authenticity. And I've got a real mixture of friends and contacts and people in that space. And yeah, that would be probably the overriding trait.
And that's the word that you use. So there's this other thing that I call it your language architecture. So we all have these structures in our minds, these sort of databases that we draw on for concepts.
And yours is quite sophisticated, I might add, a lot more sophisticated than mine, who's the person who actually studied English back in London. Yours is very sophisticated. Your vocabulary is impressive, but mine's actually a much more simple structure.
I appreciate that, Katie. Thank you. But I don't think that we can reduce it to that because there's no comparison, because you're working through different ideas in a different way. Maybe they're the same ideas, but certainly in a different way. And so I just like having these sorts of conversations and trying to develop models for people's ways of thinking. And I have a notebook I carry around and I draw these sorts of things. And I've actually considered publishing it one day because I've got a stack of ideas that really work as models for human behavior. And that's really what fascinates me and drives me to explore these sorts of things, ask these sorts of questions. And it's really what inspired me to start this show. I'm excited to be able to share those on this particular segment on the show because I have these sorts of conversations with people all the time. And now I actually get to share them with listeners. I hope listeners enjoy Hospopreneurs Plus. If you're out there listening and you don't like it, please also tell me. And if you love it, please tell me too, because I would love to know if I'm doing the right thing by you. If when you see Hospopreneurs Plus, you get excited or you get disappointed, I'd love to know. So please do reach out.
But you know you can't please all the people all the time, James.
Yes, I know that.
In fact, really good stuff really pisses people off at times. That's the juicy stuff, right? If you're going to talk about things that are going to keep everybody happy, then it's never going to be that interesting. So if you're going to talk about meaty, interesting stuff, then you're going to piss some people off. And that's a good thing. Celebrate that.
I'm totally unafraid of annoying people, but I just hope that more people are happy than disappointed or angry. It certainly won't be inspiring anger, surely.
I don't think it would be inspiring anger, although I have to say that I do think sometimes I live in a bit of a bubble. And like on that point, you think I'd like the majority to listen to this and be inspired, or listen to this and go, oh, wow, there's other people that think like that. And yeah, I think about that stuff, or I used to, but I've forgotten how to. That's made me revisit that. And that's what the hope is, for sure. I think the reality is going to be somewhat different though, James, to be honest. I remember when Trump got in, I thought, I live in a bubble. I live in a bubble. When Brexit happened, I live in a bubble. How is this stuff happening? I am clearly in this minority bubble because I don't understand how this is even possible. So there's that element to it. So don't be surprised if the majority don't feel so warm and sympathetic to Hospopreneurs Plus. Maybe you're in a bubble too.
I'm certainly unafraid to share these sorts of ideas. I think that there will be people who really enjoy this, and it is still a new segment with only a few episodes. I'm just interested to see what people think in this more free-form style of content for the show. It's certainly been popular up to the 100, so I thought I would introduce a new segment as well. I introduced it back at episode 101 as a little episode there to just have an update. But where I was trying to go with that one before, Katie, was you've obviously stumbled upon this, what you say is authenticity. So the concept, so you have a word, this language architecture, right? You have a database of words that mean things to you, and other people have other concepts that they produce in their minds that they only have a certain range of words to be able to convey through their own database of words. So that's the language architecture. And that's the frustration that comes from communication. And it's even more challenging when you have different languages as well, because you've got a whole other suite of problems to try to communicate through there. So essentially what I'm trying to pull apart is you've obviously found a way to identify some things in others through your experiences that have made you go, okay, the word that I use to summarize that is authenticity. I'm looking for authenticity. What is that, and how do you identify it in others quickly?
That's a really good question. I think it's like it's a sense of openness with somebody. And that doesn't mean that if you're introverted or you're not open to everybody, that doesn't mean you're authentic, because you can still be authentic. But for me, I like to watch people in different situations. Does someone change when someone they perceive as really important walks in the room? Or do they have the strength of character or the authenticity to be themselves, to be able to back themselves? And if they don't, then why? Because it doesn't necessarily mean that somebody isn't an absolute ripper person who is just challenged with self-esteem or whatever. And it's about an ability to open up and talk about that stuff over time. And so the people that I identify with as my close friends are people that we know all about each other. There's no shame. It's sort of an ability to share some of your innermost thoughts and fears, dreams, aspirations, hopes, and then change them and understand that things change as times change and situations change and the world changes, and be able to go on that ride with people. So I guess for my nearest and dearest, that's what I look for. And I like to question as well. And I know that I don't have all the answers at all. So one of the traits that I find quite jarring for me is when somebody feels they have all of the answers, or they get caught up in, I call it like a Daily Mail view, which actually there are people in my family who I would definitely say have a Daily Mail view. In other words, they read the Daily Mail, that becomes fact, that becomes the point they want to talk about, and then they will just talk to me about that. And I just find that really hard, especially when it's close family, to engage with or to entertain. I find it really challenging because that's not really authentically who they are necessarily. That's just them putting on an idea of somebody else, not questioning it, and then regurgitating it to anyone that will listen. I find that kind of character trait really challenging. Ignorance, that type of ignorance where there's no questioning, there's no desire for knowledge or thirst for knowledge or to understand the truth behind what's being written. And I think that leads to quite a few issues that we have in our society, that it's these sound bites, and we've certainly got, I know I have, lesser attention span than I used to have. And I look at my children and their attention span is absolutely minute. Just trying to get them to read a book is really challenging because everything's so instant in this world today. There's no waiting for anything. There's nothing like that. There's none of that sort of surprise and delight that we used to have as children. So, yeah, I think the words I would use around that authenticity are just going on a journey with someone, asking questions, identifying with people that don't know all the answers, and understanding there's a lot more that can be revealed, both in myself. It's a journey for me as well. I really have so much more that I need to discover about myself, and I have to keep myself in check as well, because you can get caught up in your own bullshit, and it is bullshit. And entrepreneurs are well known for being able to sell themselves any kind of idea. So I think the thing I've learned through the last few years has been to lay an idea out and say, pick holes in it. Pick holes in this idea. Go for it. Just go nuts. Tell me why this won't work. Because I'd rather start there than how I used to start, which is, I've got this better idea, it's going to be the best thing, let's do this. I find that the way I approach things now is a lot more realistic and authentic, if you like.
There are a lot of things in your answer there, Katy, that it made me think of something called, I think it's called anticipation utility or anticipation. There's an economic theory there around the value of anticipation. Something that you said there made me think about that as being something that might be reducing within our attention span being shorter, meaning that the value that we're placing on anticipation might be reducing, because there's actually a lot of value that can be gained from that level of anticipation we experience when we're expecting something to happen or waiting for an outcome. And so it made me think about that just a little bit. But I wonder whether that is going to be changing, or if the value that we place on anticipation will actually restructure some social norms that have come about. It was interesting there, just you saying there, obviously, that our maybe patience is decreasing as well. So I wonder how that's going to affect things. But Katy, I'd like to circle back to something just that you mentioned earlier around having all of the resources available on the planet already to be able to continue, to be able to survive and maybe thrive. I'm not certain of the answer to that one. And there are conflicting points of view on this. I want to play a bit of devil's advocate on this one. You were explaining that on this planet, we have all the resources that we need. And for some reason, people aren't utilizing the earth in the way that we can in order to be more efficient. Maybe we're effective, maybe we're not efficient with it, because we've obviously been effective through the scientific revolution. We've been able to harness resources from the planet in order to help us achieve things that we want. However, we might not be as efficient. In fact, we know that we're not as efficient as we can be, which is a lot of the argument for sustainability, right? Because we can be using these resources in better ways to not be wasting them. So we can get more out of them and in fact recycle them, and in which case we get even more out of them. But there is no perfect system. I think it's the second law of thermodynamics is that some energy disappears in all these systems. Entropy will ensue. And so I just want to play a bit of an alternative argument there with what if we don't have the infinite resources on the planet to continue, and we do have to explore outside of the Earth in order to get those resources? What does that mean for sustainability programs and humanity, I guess? That's where I'm looking to explore with the conversation into what it actually does for us. Are you following me there still?
Yeah, I get you. I get what you
Okay.
mean. Let's just say that's not a planet that I would particularly want to inhabit. But I think when I take it back to sort of food waste, for example, at the moment we produce enough food to feed the 2 billion people yet to come. That's what we take out of the earth every single year. Enough food to feed the 2 billion people that still aren't here. Everyone talks about the amount of people that are going to be here. We've got 2 billion more coming. And of course, the rate of reproduction is just off the charts. And we take that out of the earth now, and then we put that in landfill. We produce methane and we pollute our environment and cause climate change, global warming. So we're not the brightest species that's ever walked the planet, in my humble opinion, because that's not a very bright thing to do. It doesn't make any sense, but we do it, and we do it on scale every single day. So that's what this species called human beings does. It kind of reminds me of a virus, actually. It's interesting that back to the beginning of the show, the coronavirus discussion around it is a deadly virus. And I had a very dear friend myself who got coronavirus and was in ICU. It's okay now. It was scary times. But coronavirus actually, it penetrates the body and it can kill the host. There's a number, we're seeing the figure every day of the number of hosts, i.e. people that have been killed by this virus. It goes in and it takes over and it kills its host. And there's a number of viruses that do that go in and live off the host and then kill the host in the process. And it's awful. But it makes me think that mimics a little bit of the human behavior on this planet. Like, we're here and we're slowly killing our host. And what I find challenging is how intelligent and compassionate and extraordinary human beings can be. Like, really, the empathy, the compassion, how we can come together, how we can create change is just extraordinary. It's why we've been so successful. We're such a social species. And it's so creative, so innovative. Give us something and we'll turn it into something else. Really, incredibly innovative, very root of our DNA. It's just how we can harness it. So the question is, if we get to that point, that would be tragedy, because the planet has been around so much longer than we have. What we've done to it in the last, what is really in the life of the earth, a very small amount of time with our industrial revolution, what we have done in a very short amount of time is really make a rubbish pile out of paradise. And we have done that in a very short amount of time if you look at how long the planet has actually been here. And there's still an opportunity for us to turn that around. So sustainability is a word that's bandied around. I don't think it means an awful lot to a lot of people, and I don't think necessarily people understand it, because it means so many different things, and it's used in greenwashing and it's used in pretty inauthentic ways sometimes. But the reality is, it is just whatever it is you are purchasing, you are using. Does that come from a recyclable place? Is that something that can be put back in the earth? Have you thought about that choice? Or have you just seen something really cheap in Kmart and gone, oh, I best get me 20 of those because that's really great value and it's like the expensive stuff, but it's going to cost me nothing. But there is a cost. There's a huge cost. It's the hidden costs that we all need to take responsibility for. And I'm certainly not without blame on this myself. I think about the packaging. You asked me that question. It's a good question because, I've received stuff in packaging and I've had to really have a good look at myself and go, hey, you're falling asleep at the wheel. Don't fall asleep at the wheel because this is where we crash. There is a big wake-up call coming. I don't know how to answer your question of what would happen if we needed to take resources from another planet. I'd like to think that planet Earth, it's been around for millions and millions and millions of years, will actually have the upper hand on us. And that won't happen. That we won't get to the point where we can completely destroy it and have to look outside of ourselves into some kind of, weird sci-fi existence. I'm hoping that she wins that battle. And if that means that we can't inhabit the earth the way that we currently are or that we think we need to, well, then so be that. And that would a battle I'd like to see her win, not us.
Katy, I'm going to wrap up the episode there. Thank you very much for joining the program again. We've had a very roller coaster of a conversation today, from reality TV through to the future of humanity. So thank you very much for joining me on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on again. And I am hoping that you are safe and well in Melbourne and that things track well for Yume, which we haven't even mentioned once on the show today. But thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to catching up again soon, Katy.
Thank you. Thanks, James. Thanks for having me.
This program is hosted by James Henderson, with technical production by Jake Olver. Voiceovers were by Angus Brennan and Shim Phelan. Thanks to our distribution team, and a special thanks to you for tuning in every week. This program was produced by H Media. We'll see you soon.